North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson is our market analyst this week. On Tuesday, the USDA released reports on quarterly grain stocks and prospective plantings. The agency totaled corn stocks in all positions on March 1st at more than 7.7 billion bushels, up 11% from a year ago. It tallied soybean stocks at more than 1.3 billion bushels, 34% higher than last year. The USDA believes growers will plant 2% less corn at 89.2 million acres and increase soybean acres by 1% to a record 84.6 million acres. Nebraska is estimated to plant 9.3 million acres of corn, the same as 2014 and the third highest in the country. However, the state is projected to have the largest drop in the nation in soybean area, falling 300,000 acres to 5.1 million and a tie with Ohio as the 8th largest grower. We talked with Frayne Wednesday afternoon and asked first for his thoughts on the grain stocks estimates.
Well, the one number that I think the trade focused on the most was the corn stocks number. That's usually the hardest one to track. On the soybean and the wheat side, we have intermediate reports that we can use to track things fairly closely, but the corn one is very difficult just because the livestock sector and the feed usage is such a big component of that number. So we use these quarterly stocks report as a gauge for how quickly are we using up corn within the feed business. And it looks right now, based on the numbers, the quarterly stocks report came out a little bit bigger than what the trade was expecting. That suggests we may not be feeding quite as much corn into the livestock sector as we had originally thought. One of the things we will have to watch as we move into April and the April WSDA report is, will USDA adjust that feeding number as we move forward?
What are your overall thoughts on the number of acres that the USDA put out this week?
Well, of course, that was a report that everybody was really focused on, and in particular on the soybean numbers. If you looked at kind of the pre-trade estimates, the range in the corn number was relatively tight, the range in the wheat number was relatively tight, but there was a wide range in the soybean number, and that's kind of what everybody was watching. But that ended up to be kind of the number that came the closest. So the average trade estimate on the soybean was very close to what the USDA report said. Actually a little bit positive. We're going to have more soybeans next year, but not quite as much as what the trade had expected. On the corn side, we know we're going to have a cutback in corn acres. That cutback wasn't quite as strong as we had expected, so the combination of a little bit more ending stocks and a little bit more acres was really what put the downward pressure on corn. On the wheat side, there were very small adjustments in the winter wheat seedings number. Most of the wheat numbers, or the interest in the wheat sector, was in the spring wheat and the durum numbers. And again, they came out very close to what the trade was expecting.
Well, we talked before about where these acres could possibly go and specifically what would go to soybeans. Nebraska takes the biggest hit, going down 300,000 acres, but North Dakota, which would be the 4th largest planter this year, goes down 100,000 acres. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and that was a surprise to me, because as I talk to farmers, as I've traveled during the winter meeting season now, my expectation was that we were going to have an increase in soybean acres in North Dakota, and I still think that's very likely. I think part of the difference between what the report said and what I'm hearing out in the country is a little bit has to do with the survey methodology that USDA uses. I'm not sure that they're surveying those northern and western growers, the new growers of the corn and soybean belt in North Dakota. I don't know that they're surveying those folks as deeply as much as they should. And again, that will be our transition zone. That's where all our acres will be flipping around. So I would not be surprised that by the time we get into final planting season and we get the final numbers that North Dakota soybeans are up. On the Nebraska side, again, you know, these central plains states are the transition zone. When the world needs more one crop or another, we tend to be the ones that make those adjustments. So again, it'll be very interesting to see what happens in Nebraska as well.
Based on where the adjustment is for corn and soybean acres across the multiple state region, do you think that could change as we get forward into actual planting season?
Yeah, and that was one of the things that, again, I was looking for was, where are the shifts? Can we get some general patterns for the shifting of acres? And on the corn side, we did see the central and eastern corn belt those states have most of the reduction, and then the western corn belt being fairly neutral to, you know, about even where they were last year. And on the soybean side, it was the exact opposite. Most of the big increases in soybean acres came in the central and in particular the eastern corn belt, with those western corn belt states having a slight decrease. And so as we go through spring's work, knowing that the western corn belt's a bit on the dry side and the eastern corn belt's pretty wet and wet last fall, had a lot of rain this summer. It looks like we're getting some more rain showers this spring. There's concerns about, you know, what kind of planting progress we'll have. Will these acreage shifts or people adjust their planting intentions if it does get to be a very wet, drawn-out spring, especially in the eastern Corn Belt? And then again, on the western Corn Belt, are we going to get some rains, or is this is some of the drought that we're seeing in the southern plains, is that will continue to spread into the western regions? Again, from a market dynamic standpoint, these will be things we're watching.
Now, I know a few weeks ago when we talked, you were very bearish in soybeans. After the report, does that hold?
I still am. I'm not quite as bearish as I was before. I think, again, we'll wait to see what the acreage is. I do still think there's more downward pressure on soybeans than upward potential. Again, a lot will depend upon planting progress and again, weather during the growing season. But if we get normal production, if we get normal yields across the nation, we're going to have lots of soybeans around, both domestically and internationally. And I think that'll put some downward pressure on soybeans.
How positive are you on corn?
Corn, I'm fairly neutral on corn. I think we'll be in a fairly tight trading range through the rest of spring. The key, of course, reproductive stage for corn will come a little bit later in the summer. If we do get some sparks, it'll more than likely come from that point in time. Again, the weather will dominate with the corn market.
To close, give me your thoughts on where the wheat market could head.
Well, very quickly on the wheat side, obviously what's happening in the winter wheat belt, hard red winter wheat area in particular, is something we need to be watching very closely. The wheat market's already recognized there's some problems showing up, and those problems may get more extensive as we dig into it. The other part of the world I'm watching is actually the Russian winter wheat production region that has some very similar challenges to what we're having here in the U.S. And of course, if Russia has a poor crop, the rest of the world, and in particular wheat market, watch that very closely.